Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the 2024 roundup as well as outlook for 2025 that Fintech Decoded is running. I'm Musheer Ahmed, founder of Fintech Asia. With me today is a friend and moreover an expert of fintech in Southeast Asia and in Asia, Mr. Vincent, who is the chief editor of Fintech News Network, who have been providing some excellent insights and news on the region for many years now. Vincent, welcome to Fintech Decoded. How are you doing today?
Great, Mushe, thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Great. We've looked at the ASEAN region together over a long period of time, and now it's been growing. Would love to get your insights and inputs on what have been the key growth. I mean, not necessarily growth stories, but what have been the key news and initiatives you've
Mm.
seen come out?
So 2024 has been a really, really exciting year for fintech in ASEAN. I think the kind of news flow that's coming out has really kept my team very, very busy throughout the year. And one of the most, I guess, perhaps most exciting thing that we're seeing in Southeast Asia is the development in the cross-border payment space. What we've
Sure.
seen is Singapore going live with interoperable QR with Malaysia, Thailand. It also has gone live with real-time payment linkages with Malaysia, Thailand, and Indonesia. So the next phase of growth for cross-border payments in 2025 is what was announced in November just last month, and that's very important, is the Nexus Scheme organization. It is an entity that's set up by the central banks and the monetary authorities of Singapore, Malaysia, Philippines, Thailand, and India,
Yeah.
with the BIS playing an advisory role to really accelerate the dream of real-time payments, efficient cross-border payments that really kind of mimics the experience of domestic payments. So I think in the next few years, with the establishment of the NSO, we may be seeing an ASEAN-wide real-time interoperable QR between the countries, making it far, far more seamless. The other thing that we are observing that's a real growth area is stablecoins. Stablecoins in Singapore, I think in Q2 of this year, has reached a record high of over $1 billion US. Now, the adoption of stablecoins like the straight XSUD has also seen a very promising kind of volume, with 25% of it under 10,000, which suggests a very strong base of retail activity. Beyond just local players, we're also seeing international folks like Coinbase, right? They have also announced that they are eyeing stable coins as pegged to the Thai baht and the Philippines peso as part of its focus in Southeast Asia. So we're really, really seeing a lot of activities in stable coins. In fact, there's a local player called DTC Pay. They've also just announced that by January 2025, they will shift exclusively to be focusing on stable coins for all its payment services. So really a big growth area for fintech in Southeast Asia. Of course, when we talk about Southeast Asia, we can't avoid the conversation of digital banks. And I think the conversation is starting to shift from user growth more to profitability, as we've also seen in the Hong Kong market as well. I think some of these banks have already been in operations for a couple of years.
Yeah.
So far, the Singaporeans ones have not been profitable yet. In Malaysia, we've launched one last year, two this year, and most likely another two will be coming out by 2025.
Okay.
In Philippines, we are seeing 2 out of 6 digital banks are already profitable.
Okay.
The two who are profitable are the incumbent banks. And interestingly, if you look at what's happening, the Bangko Sentral ng Filipinas have lifted the moratorium. So we could be seeing up to 10 digital banking licenses by 2025.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a pretty strong number, right? And I think there was a
Mm,
research by BCG last year, I think, which showcased a majority of digital banks
mm,
were based in
yeah.
Southeast Asia, right? And
Yeah.
East Asia. So yeah.
I think that report which you were pointing out to, if my memory serves me correctly, says that only 3 or 5% of the digital banks in the world are profitable.
Comfortable, yes.
And I think most of it comes from Asia Pacific, including, Hong Kong, China, and some of the Southeast Asian digital banks. But I think that number has been updated slightly because we're seeing some profitability coming out of like Nubank and some of the other
Yeah.
European digital banks as well. So, it's an ongoing conversation and a very interesting one that's developing.
And
The other,
yeah,
sorry, go ahead, Moshe.
no, I was just gonna say, yeah, agreed on that. I think you're seeing
Mm,
Revolut as well, looking at Southeast Asia and South Asia as well, right? From a digital
mm.
banking potential perspective. Yeah.
Certainly. I think the big difference is that if you look at the models over there, it's all very standalone digital banks, whereas in Asia, you see it's a lot of consortiums and even incumbent-led banks. So as I said, for the Philippines one, interestingly, the two that's profitable is incumbent-led. So I guess they kind of just shifted the entire user base to the, at least a big portion of the user base to the digital bank. I think
Sure.
one other interesting area, Moshe, is the emergence of digital insurance as well.
Yeah.
So in Malaysia, Bank Negara Malaysia will begin taking application for digital insurers and takaful operators beginning 2nd January 2025 to 31st December 2026, sort of a rolling application. Now, why this is actually very interesting is because Malaysia is very, very underinsured. More than half of Malaysians do not have any insurance policies. And of course, the SMEs are also not very well insured as well. So if this proves to be a successful model or a framework, the other Southeast Asian countries might follow as well, because in Southeast Asia, the other regulators haven't rolled out anything similar as of yet.
Okay. And I know you touched
Mm,
on Takaful, which is again on the
yeah,
Sharia side of things.
yeah.
How has that progressed? I know the likes of
Mm,
Alami had kind of acquired a
mm,
bank in some senses or merged with the bank, and
mm,
we see some more names come out of Indonesia. But how are you seeing the growth in especially in Indonesia and Malaysia for
mm.
Islamic fintech or Islamic finance related projects?
I think Islamic fintech and Islamic finance as a whole has massive potential to grow, right? As you know, if you look at the numbers, Malaysia is one of the leading countries when it comes to Islamic finance. I think the government is also very, very aware of that as well, which is
Yeah,
why all the regulators and all the policymakers in Malaysia, a very big part of their 5-year framework, 3-year framework, all the financial blueprints are very focused on developing Islamic finance. And the industry is also taking notice, and they're also growing and developing the area to really be able to mark a stamp for Malaysia. I think another big area, maybe not as sexy or as exciting, but equally important is fraud and scams, right? I think it's very clear globally, scams, frauds, they're all on the rise. In Singapore, at least, there are a lot of developments, even in other parts of Southeast Asia as well. So the authorities have actually reported, I think, 1,001 cases in Singapore between January and October. That is sort of government impersonation scams. And I believe the losses were up to 120 million Sing dollars. So even if you look at a lot of industry report, like a recent one that came out from Nexus Risk Solution,
yeah,
what they mentioned is that there are 1.8 billion attacks for bot attacks, and that is more than half of the global total of 3.5 billion. So it's one of the obviously most targeted industries in the world. So what we're seeing in Singapore in terms of what the regulator is doing to tackle this, in fact, just a couple of weeks from when we're doing this recording, the
yeah,
Singapore government will be releasing the shared responsibility framework,
yeah,
where it's really looking at who would take responsibility of phishing scams. They have a very clear flow chart on when the bank should be responsible for the losses, and when maybe the telco needs to be responsible for the losses. Taking even a step further, what's interesting is that the government has also proposed a bill as well, and this
yeah,
bill will empower the police to restrict bank accounts of potential scam victims.
yeah.
So that might sound a little bit dicey, but there was a recent case. There was a lady in her 30s in Singapore, and despite warnings from the police and also OCBC Bank as well that this is very, very likely to be a scam, she went ahead and transferred, I think, about 300 over 1,000 Sing dollars,
Okay.
most of her savings. And I think she even went so far to sign an indemnity form as well. So there are some arguments for this bill, I believe.
Yeah, I think we in some
Mm,
sense the scam and fraud piece is becoming super big everywhere in Asia.
sure.
Hong Kong's also seen hundreds of
Yeah.
millions of Hong Kong dollars worth of losses. Quite a bit
Mm,
of those are either impersonations, as you mentioned, of either police
yeah.
or government officials, or there've been these honey scams, right? Honey trap scams,
Yeah.
essentially where somebody is um, targeting lonely people or single people,
Yeah.
building a relationship, and then they bring them onto a investment platform and get them to invest there, and then the money gets
Yeah.
away. Any views on RBI's MuleHunter.ai, the AI platform that they've recently launched, and how something like that could be replicated in Southeast Asia?
Mm. So I'm afraid our coverage of fintech stories is more Southeast Asia focused.
Yeah.
So I'm not entirely familiar with what RBI has launched, but I think in general, a lot of Southeast Asia's initiatives tend to replicate what happens in China and India. So like the UPI, right? So the whole real-time payment network is also inspired by that as well. So I'm sure if the initiative by RBI is successful, then we would also be seeing in Southeast Asia as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think
Sorry,
just
yeah.
yeah, go on. I was just gonna say what they've basically
Mm,
done is created an AI
mm,
platform tool slash, I mean, tool more so than platform
mm,
to try to detect fraud businesses or fraud scams and try to neutralize that, right? That's why the term mule hunter
ah,
senses. It just launched last week. It's an AI and machine learning tool, and we'll see how it works in practice. But yeah, you're seeing the government take that initiative, as you can see with Singapore. Coming back, I don't want to focus on India too much. We've had long conversations on that. What about on the wealth and investment tech side? How have you been seeing, the evolution of the robo advisors or just also digital brokers, given there's very high
mm,
volumes in some of the markets when it comes to stock markets like Vietnam, Indonesia
mm.
as well. So, yeah.
Certainly, we're seeing a lot of international players coming in, right? So recently, of course, we've seen Mumu, we see Vibu entering both Malaysia and Singapore, and it's really shaking up the competition among the local players because what these international players bring in is a, a wider selection of investment opportunities, better UI here and there. So a lot of local players are also needing to step up their game as well. I think what is also interesting is Robinhood has announced that they are setting up their office in Singapore with a eye to expand into the rest of Southeast Asia and Asia as well. So I think it would also be really interesting to see what kind of impact they will have on the local scene. On the robo-advisor front, I think it is a very exciting tool for retail investors to be able to, well, perhaps isn't so investment savvy to be able to have access to all these investment opportunities, right? But I think the struggle is that it still hasn't really picked up traction yet. If you look at Singapore, I believe the asset under management for this year is projected to be around 1 billion Sing dollars. And whereas in Malaysia, I think the number is also about 1 billion Malaysian ringgit last year. So it's not really had captured that whole critical mass yet. There's still a lot of room to grow for robo-advisors.
Okay. And from a perspective of just taking a slight deviation from
Mm,
there, what are your thoughts on institutional play for crypto or generally crypto
mm,
in the region? What I have experienced
yeah.
largely, you have a dichotomy of blockchain, we love it, but crypto
Mm.
is restricted or not allowed in most of the Southeast Asian countries outside of maybe Singapore. But how are you seeing that grow
So I think
in the
what
next?
is interesting is that maybe people outside of Singapore might not be aware. DBS does have a crypto investment arm, which is called DDEX.
Yeah.
And I don't recall the specific number, but the growth they've had this year was very, very impressive. So I think DBS being the largest bank in Southeast Asia kind of sends a signal to the rest of the banks in Southeast Asia that crypto is serious business. It's not just meme coins, and there are real institutional money that's pouring into crypto, right? So then a lot of banks are also considering what's their play in crypto as well. But I think as of the moment, the mood on the industry is still a little bit cautious, but they are seriously looking into it. Um, I think one example is an independent investment bank in Malaysia called Kenanga. Um, a year or two ago, they acquired a stake in the Singaporean crypto exchange Tokenize. So that indicates to me that there are some serious considerations into this space by the traditional players.
Yeah, and I'm just extending, I think, what I saw over the year, at least from use some more restrictions on the play to earn in Philippines, which
Yeah.
blew up massively and then blew up both ways, right? Blew up in terms of use,
Yeah.
everybody getting into it, in particular with one application. We won't name them necessarily, but then blew up because NFTs and everything has just crashed in value. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of issues with that. So you saw restrictions come in. On the other side, I think in Thailand you are seeing quite a bit of action in terms of regulated token listings
Mm,
via more traditional institutions getting into virtual assets as well. So, being a
mm,
SCB and a few of the others, you also had the announcement with where one of the Thai banks was working with JP Morgan on
yeah.
the organization front, right? So I think that's probably bodes well to look forward to.
Mm,
But the retail element of crypto trading, I just feel probably is a year or two away in the
mm.
region. Wonder if your views would be the same.
Yeah, I think definitely. And we, especially with the bull run that we're seeing right now, over 100,000, I think that would really drive adoption, at least over the next few months, and if not over the next few years.
Yeah. Right. Any other themes, Vincent, that you like to talk about over the year? Maybe also investment, if you're able to touch upon on how the VC investments have been for the region, on par, slow
Mm,
in previous years.
So I think similar to the trends in the past, Singapore still gets the lion's share of the VC investment in Southeast Asia.
Yes.
But increasingly, we're seeing a lot of these companies that are headquartered in Singapore really expanding to the rest of Southeast Asia, right? Particularly Malaysia, Philippines, and Thailand as well. Um, I think it's clear that the overall deal flow is going down, but investments are still coming in for mature players looking at Series A, Series B, Series C kind of investments. I think there's also a lot more focus and conversation around financial discipline versus growth for the sake of growth, right? And I think that's really the name of the game for the day.
And expectations for 2025, other than what we've spoken about, anything that sticks out to you, two or three themes?
I think the main areas again we're looking at is probably for us is cross-border payments, stable coins, and also digital banks as well.
Okay,
I
so
mean,
we'll stick.
even
Yeah, go
yeah,
ahead.
even Thailand, which I didn't mention, is also looking into rolling out as well, right? So that's another area we are paying attention to.
Yeah, I think the licensing announcements expected Q1, somewhere towards that
Somewhere
time.
around there, yes, exactly.
And finally, maybe closing with the hot theme that everybody is overwhelmed with and keeps getting amazed with AI in financial service. Uh, I wouldn't ask about how you've
Uh,
seen it in
yeah.
2024, maybe more from an expectation of
Mm,
reality versus,
mm,
the hype around AI in financial services. How are you seeing that response in the region, both in
mm,
terms of AI startups for finance, but also
mm.
how the banks are responding or likely to respond?
Yeah. So I think the hype cycle is really, really interesting in the sense that every few years we'll get a different subject that everybody's hyped about, right?
Yeah,
And our PR inbox will just be bombarded with the same topics. And of course, for this year, it would be AI. And we're seeing a lot of, I guess, startups that were previously blockchain focused now pivoting to AI just to capture some
yeah,
of that VC money, right? But I think the reality of things is that AI is great. It has a lot of potential. I'm just not sure whether, particularly in the financial services sector, where the accuracy is very important, whether it's ready for consumer-facing applications. But of course, on back-end support functions to be able to augment and enable the banking employees to do their job better, to serve the customers better, to do compliance a little bit better. I think there's a lot of potential for application in the back-end functions versus the front-end functions.
got it. Perfect. Vincent, really loved the conversation. Very, very insightful.
Likewise.
Listeners are going to really like this. Please do follow and look at both Vincent as well as Fintech News Network. They have some very good information that comes out on a regular basis on the different countries, but also as a region. A deep expert as bar none when it comes to Southeast Asia and the broader Asian market. So pleasure having you here, Vincent, and
Likewise, Musheer.
for us staying in touch in the coming years. Audience, stay tuned. More coming up next on the different areas, regions of the world, and the outlook for 2025 for each of them as we move forward in the 2024-2025 conversation. So thank you once again, Vincent, and thank you.
Thank you,
audience.
Musheer.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Fintech Decoded. Here with me today is a guest who's been on our podcast before, but a big thought leader in AI and financial services, one of the most influential women in fintech, Hong Kong lady who's visiting Hong Kong but based in the US, Theo, founder of Unconventional Ventures, Theodora. Theo, welcome back
Thank you
to
so much.
Fintech Decoded.
Yeah, thank you for having me back again in my favorite city in the world.
It is. It's stunning. I mean, I wish I could show the scene that we have outside. But yeah,
God,
Hong Kong
yes.
in autumn is the most beautiful place I've lived in by far, excluding maybe Bangalore as a hometown. But anyways, that being said, what we're doing now is this is part of our end of year review where we look at what happened over the last year and what is expected in fintech in 2025. Very privileged and honored to have Theo here give us her insights on North America, especially in particular the United States, and what's been happening there, what have been the key elements of development in fintech, and what would be expected in the coming years. So Theo, diving straight into it, what are the key themes that you've seen solidify or come in the United States for fintech and digital banking generally over the last year?
I think it's been a very interesting space. I would categorize this as much has changed and much has not.
Okay.
So in a banking perspective, right, there's still a lot of needs for digital transformation. We've been talking about it for years.
Yeah.
We've finally seen some movement
Okay.
with some of the financial institutions, especially around business banking.
Yeah.
I think that's a space that's still sorely needed. We talk a lot about consumer banking changes, but now our focus has shifted to business banking.
Sure.
Right? So that
Okay.
that part of how do we make the experience better? How do we enable things happen faster and less manually? That's a big trend last year.
Yeah.
Around small business, that's another big key area. We've seen movement, not just in North America, but around the world. We've acknowledged the need of small businesses, their need for speed, their need for time.
Yeah.
And I think our industry is responding to it by extending more credit, by making processes simpler, helping them get access to faster credit. So that's a welcoming change.
This is driven by digital fintech.
Digital fintech is by the need for the economy, right? If you think about small businesses, previously we have talked about they are more than 90% of businesses, right? And in North America and many economies around the world. And so in that case, you think about what is it that they need? They need access to credit.
Correct.
That's hard because the processes are hard. And also, if you think about risk assessment, right, the modeling is different lending to larger businesses versus smaller businesses. Fluctuation. And then you think about time. Small business owners, they need a lot of time. So whoever can help them save time, make things more efficient, that's welcoming change.
And also the lack of digital records, as it were. So then the data underlying isn't.
Exactly. So that's another big piece. So along with that, faster payment, that was something that started happening in the United States. Finally, fingers crossed. So it will be interesting to see what happens in the next few years.
So this is the Fed Now initiative.
Yes.
Do you want to talk a little bit about how that came about and how it's who's driving it? Yeah.
I think it's interesting if you look at we don't typically. So the joke is that United States is probably one of the few developed countries that still uses check, shall we say? And so money movement has taken a long time, even though money could be subtracted from your account. It would take another 3+ days for it to reappear on the other side. So hopefully by the time this is all implemented, we'll see more faster, quicker account-to-account money movement. We'll see settlements being done faster. We'll see businesses having access to liquidity faster, being the forecast much better, cash flow management. All of that is important for survival of businesses. But I think there still needs to be how still needs to be worked.
Yeah, you've seen that in the other regions, right? In South America with PIX, Brazil now, I think 90% of the population or so is using. Similar in India with UPI, PromptPay Asia has led that piece. Real-time, settle, low-value, high-volume. I think UPI in India has done about 16 billion transactions of November. So with the US being the world's largest economy, that transition is probably going to be crucial as they start doing more mobile money. Let's put it that way, right? Yeah.
Yes, that's the hope.
Okay.
But don't forget about UPI globalization, right? That was also an interesting case.
Yeah.
And then beyond that, the elephant in the room, AI, right?
Yeah.
So there are lots more financial institutions taking note of, what can we do with AI?
Sure.
The funny thing is, AI has been used by banks for quite a while, mostly in the back end, but now the interest is, what can we do with generative AI? How can we use it to smooth out processes? How can we use it to make things more efficient? So we see more financial institutions experimenting with it.
Yeah.
But experimenting being the key word, a lot of POCs being done. We haven't quite crossed the threshold of large-scale production, putting it, on a more permanent basis. So that still needs to be done.
Okay, and you'd also house the broader M&A activity that's taking place in the region. Yeah,
that's been really interesting. I'm glad you asked that. So we're seeing more banks actually buying smaller institutions, for example, credit union. So that's been interesting. We know that we have a lot of financial institutions in the United States, and so we know that consolidation will continue. But there has been quite a bit of movement when it comes to credit unions buying smaller institutions. So I think that will continue. And going forward to next year, I think we'll talk about, what's going to happen next. But before I forget, one more trend, which happened just very recently, is open banking.
Okay. Yeah.
Right? So finally, the ruling came about. But getting that to implementation, I think that, again, will take time. Data sharing is a good thing, I believe, for consumers, but there's, as expected, pushback from financial institutions. So seeing how that will play out, especially with potential changes with CFPP, et cetera, I think that will be something.
And I'm just going to add on the Web3 and blockchain front, as it were. I think you've seen in the US a big move, which impacted globally as a bullish sign, where you had the approvals for Bitcoin ETFs and soon to also look at Ethereum. BlackRock's heavily invested, as are some of the other large asset managers. That just has given that green light for a lot of the other traditional financial institutions to get actively involved. On the other front, you've also seen quite a bit of regulatory action on a host of different companies, including looking at FTX and others. We had the Celsius case as well in place. So it's been a balance of the two, but at the end of it, you're seeing more growth, more interest in Bitcoin, and with institutional play, CME, who is one of the more, if you can call it, traditional exchanges, they saw record high volumes last month on institutionals' interest in Bitcoin and Ethereum futures, right? So you are seeing, I think, that big move in the institutional side of things for crypto in general and digital assets. But the other side, you are having large American banks like Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan, global giants, who are now using blockchain for a bunch of financial transactions through Onyx or the digital assets platform that Goldman has, which is more to do with traditional finance, but using blockchain more for the technology than anything else. So we've had that coverage of 2021.
And don't forget PayPal, right?
Yeah,
Stablecoin.
PayPal, stablecoin USD that came out, which is again bringing in one of the more known large payment players to get involved in the stablecoin regime, right? From a CBDC perspective, broader conversation in the US has been pushed back. There's been some research done, but not so much more. You had a lot of research came out last year that was commissioned by the Biden administration on crypto and blockchain, but not much regulatory progress per se. Prior to Donald Trump being elected, the general expectation was more negative on crypto, and now we probably will talking about 2025, and we'll probably speak more on that too. 2025, right? A very important, critical year for multiple industries, but for fintech and financial services, what are you expecting?
Oh, 2025. I think from a very broad perspective, maybe you talk to financial services industry, people are cautiously optimistic
Sure.
about potentially being able to have less regulations around M&As, around what they need to do with respect to consumer protection, good or bad. Seems like, they are hoping for less of governance, if you will,
Sure.
around what they cannot do. So that's a general
The deregulation conversation around
It's
how
a
the Republicans
deregulation.
typically look at
Yeah.
things as well.
So, along with that, are we going to see more M&As? I think yes. Are we going to see more banks trying to partner with fintechs, smaller companies? I think yes, right?
Okay.
Are we going to see more activity around banking and AI? Probably yes as well, because one of the bigger concerns with financial institutions, especially the smaller ones, because of the lack of clarity around what they cannot do with AI, a lot of them are sitting back and waiting, right? Because the cost of litigation is too high.
It's high, yeah.
So now if there is less regulation, the sentiment is, well, maybe we can go try something else. So along with that, AI, in the last few years, we've seen the Biden administration coming out with the guidance around the White House executive order, around what we need to do to create and foster more responsible AI development, more in line with the EU AI Act approach.
Yeah, correct.
Going forward, we have heard the incoming administration talking about potentially walking back on some of that, right? As a way to create more freedom of space, if you will, for tech companies.
Fair.
So if we do that, and if we just were to take some notes of, how the incoming administration is going to operate based on the last try in 2016, I think we will probably see more deregulation around financial services and AI and tech innovation.
Okay.
We will likely, and I hope this will not be true, to be more restrictive on immigration. And I think that will have a big impact on the tech industry as well as the startups, because we do
talent conversation,
right? We need resources, we need talent. So we do become more restrictive. And the question will be, how do we stay innovative, right? And to keep up with what we need.
Yeah, so I think that the DOGE plus immigration policies are going to be important, and whether high-skilled labor continues to have a home and easier access versus illegal immigrants. Right? On the crypto side, a lot of expectations on regulations. It sounds a bit strange, but I think most of the major crypto players, from Coinbase to Gemini and others, have been seeking regulations for clarity, right? So it's a lot of lack of clarity, a lot of overlap between different regulators, and an approach of trying to retrofit existing regulations in securities, etc., as the way forward for crypto. So not so much tailored, but use of traditional regulations in so far. We do know that Gary Gensler, the chair of the SEC, has announced that he'll be stepping down on Jan 20th, that's the start of the Trump administration. And we then now had an announcement on the new nominee for the SEC chair, who is more likely to be crypto friendly. So I think there's a big expectation on the crypto side for getting more streamlined, tailor-made regulations for virtual assets and digital assets. Same, yeah. But that will enable crypto firms to expand their products and reach, but also for traditional financial firms to get more into it. You've seen that access from BlackRock and others from an investment product perspective, investment side of things, but not so much on a variety of different use cases, from lending to traditional banking, financing use cases, which have been a bit of a challenge because of different regulatory overheads, as it were, or challenges. So I think that's going to change, and we will see more structure towards the second half of the year in particular.
Yeah,
So,
I think what that could potentially induce too is more flow of capital.
correct. Yeah.
And a more optimistic sentiment. And along with that, I think some folks are predicting a more active IPO market, for example.
Possible. You could then see more crypto firms starting to go list there, and AI firms as well, with a lot of the money that they've raised and accelerated.
Money is somewhere.
Yeah, it is there. So thank you so much. It's been really insightful, and our audience is going to take a lot away for this.
Thanks.
It's always an honor and pleasure. Audience, stay tuned for more of our insights on this. Next up, following this session, is going to be a conversation on the Middle East and North Africa with Namir Khan and Ronit Ghosh. So stay tuned. Following this section, we're going to be speaking to them and taking that forward as we go from this part of the world to other parts of the world and the developments and expectations for fintech. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Fintech Decoded, looking at the global outlook and what's happened in fintech in various parts of the world. This is the Fintech boys using our Meta glasses, coming to you from Hong Kong, Istanbul, and Dubai, or Abu Dhabi, probably, or on the border with Namir, right? So today
Namir is everywhere. Namir is everywhere.
Yeah. Joining me today is the person who's everywhere in the MENA, the founding chairman of the MENA Fintech Association and the founder and CEO of Pills, which is revolutionizing how we look at carbon and sustainability in finance. Welcome, Namir.
Thank you for having me, Musheer. Thank you.
Thanks for joining. And alongside, person who doesn't need an introduction either, Mr. Ronit Ghosh, who is the head of Future of Finance at Citi and also a board member of the MENA Fintech Association and a well-renowned author on the future of finance. Thank you for joining, Ronit.
Thank you for having us, and loving your Meta glasses.
Got to do what you got to do after Mark has come up with his updates, right?
Absolutely.
And thank you for introducing me to it, right? So that's just
Ron is on the trend, to be very honest. Let's give it to him.
Yeah,
a big round of applause.
Absolutely. And
we tip our glasses to you. Right?
Yeah, let's do that. Yeah.
We tip our glasses to you. Yeah.
I think those glasses you're wearing, Musheer, were brought for you by
your missus. Yeah.
Yeah, I couriered them.
Mine under the normal Ray-Bans, by the way.
Mrs. Ghosh bought them for you in Covent Garden.
You got to upgrade them, Namir.
Yeah, I know.
Here we are, future of finance, future of tech,
and the
present of tech. I'm going to continue with this.
Are you recording us in your glasses?
No, I'm not recording on the glasses. I'm using the normal Zoom on the phone, and hence the glasses here to isolate my voice. So we'll start off. How about we can look at thematic as well as country by country. We can break it down either ways. Whoever feels first to take a go, we can. Maybe we can start off talking about what's happening in fintech over the last year so maybe it's Saudi Arabia, given it's the largest economy and a big representation. Who wants to take what's been happening in fintech in Saudi?
I'll let Ronit start, and then after that, I'll come in.
Go for it.
Sure. Thanks, Namir. So obviously Saudi is the biggest economy in the region, and increasingly the largest fintech market. If we zoom out over the last 5 to 7 years, a lot of the new developments have taken place in the U.A.E. and Dubai and Abu Dhabi, but increasingly Saudi is in fintech, like more broadly, coming to the center. I think several things stand out about Saudi, and I'd probably call out 2 trends. One is BNPL, buy now, pay later. BNPL is, I don't know what the right word is. BNPL in many markets has failed. Australia being a very good example. Starting in Australia, and you could say maybe in parts of the US and Europe, BNPL is struggling in some of these markets. In Saudi, it's been going from strength to strength. And BNPL has really hit a couple of sweet spots in Saudi. Maybe call out 3 factors. Number one, there wasn't much of a credit card market in Saudi, unlike, say, the US, Australia, UK. BNPL came in Australia as a let's target younger clients, let's target female millennial online shoppers. Whereas in Saudi, it was part of a growing consumerization of society and really appealed to not just one demographic, it appeals to a lot of people. Now, Saudi, like the broader region, including UAE, Egypt, India, Saudi, the demographics, people are young and they're very digital. So you have a lot of digital natives. And so BNPL, both online and offline, fits in very well with this demographic. Specifically, you've seen as well a couple of very successful companies, fintechs. We can just talk about big picture trends, but maybe we should give agency to the founders and the entrepreneurs. And we've had a couple of very successful BNPL players out of Saudi, UAE, and they've helped drive that trend as well. And I'm thinking of Tamara and Tabi specifically here, and there are others as well in the region. Now, BNPL probably in Saudi and to some extent the UAE is a distinguishing and a standout feature of fintech in the region. The second big trend I'd call out in Saudi is neobanks, digital neobanks. Musheer, you're in Hong Kong. Obviously, you've seen many of these pushed by HKMA regulations. We've seen this in Singapore. They sort of started out to an extent in the UK after the financial crisis about 12 years ago or so. And in Saudi, what you have had is the successful ones have really been the ones with unfair advantages. You always want, when you're investing in fintechs, to invest in companies with unfair advantages. By unfair advantages, I mean just having an existing built-in franchise, a client base, or a network or a brand. And in Saudi, what we've seen is, and we've seen this to some extent in the UAE as well, STC Pay, STC Bank really leverage their existing built-in client franchise with some neat products, starting among other products with remittance and now going more broad. So those are some of the trends I'd call out, neobanks and BNPL. And thirdly, and this is not about 2024, but it's a multi-year trend, you could call it digital public infrastructure. You've seen this obviously big time in India with UPI and others, and you're seeing similar type of projects in Saudi and the UAE. So those are the trends I'd call out for Saudi, and some of these also apply to the UAE. What doesn't work is, particularly in the UAE, but also in Saudi, is yet another consumer payment app. That doesn't work. It's hard to compete against incumbents or players with embedded advantages coming out of the non-bank sector into fintech, be it telcos or other financial companies. Setting up a payment app competing against those incumbents or super apps with whether it's a telco link or a ride-hailing link, really, really hard. And it's been a little bit of a graveyard, particularly in the UAE, of consumer fintechs in that sense. So those are the big trends I'd call out. I haven't touched upon digital assets and crypto. We'll come back to that later in the conversation.
Thanks, Ronit. Namir, to add?
I think so. From the Ronit touched on many important aspects, and when we're looking at what has happened in the wider region itself, Saudi and outside as well. So I think on the regulatory perspective, this year has been very good. I'll start with what has happened with UAE itself. So UAE launched the Open Finance Framework. That was very critical. It was long awaited. And the launch of the Open Finance Framework has really triggered new interest of multiple fintechs in the region and outside as well, and looking at UAE, of course, for different deployments. The second thing that UAE Central Bank has done, which we were also able to see very recently on a call that we had with them, was on the sandboxing regulations, and Musheer, you were a part of it too, on basically, without having a full license, enabling the fintechs to start testing. So, which is very critical. for fintech's growth as well, and also for the engagement of, I would say, fintechs for the central bank. The third most important, I would say, regulatory update with the central bank was the stablecoin licensing. The dirham-backed stablecoins that were launched very recently. Now, that was very encouraging again for the overall digital asset space itself, and very timely as well, considering what has been happening in the digital asset space. So I think in UAE, these three critical things really took place. Now, if
Do you want to touch on sustainable
Yeah, sure.
finance and fintech as well in UAE, given Phil's?
So in sustainability, I would say the important thing that has happened would be in COP28, Mushi, what had happened is that around 1 trillion dirhams were committed by the UAE banks towards climate finance. So that had started in COP28. Of course, there has been great progress on that when it comes to, I would say, what has been happening this year, and of course, the years ahead as well, considering the regulations are going to be in full flow when it comes to sustainable finance. The other important element that had happened in UAE was, I would say, another important fund that was launched, which was Altera Fund. That's around $30 billion, and that was also, by the way, launched during COP28. So that was another major movement, I would say. And in terms of, you mentioned the other thing apart from sustainable finance, Rishi, what was that?
Fintech and green finance, right? So the kind of work that you've been doing yeah.
So I think in large, what we're seeing in sustainable finance is, outside the regulations, we have seen major banks stepping into climate finance and taking it more seriously, and especially after the most recent development from COP29, which was Article 6.4 on carbon markets. We have seen ourselves, I would say, a very different conversation with the banks as well in the region, who are now looking at climate finance more seriously, and of course, simultaneously engaging with carbon markets as well. Because of course, right now we're standing at around $300 billion, $1.3 trillion are required every year to be invested into climate finance. There's a huge gap that needs to be filled, but of course, the good thing is that there's movement on the regional level. But this brings me to what has happened in Saudi Arabia as well. Saudi Arabia during COP29 launched the Voluntary Carbon Markets Company. The day they launched, they had 23 private participants that participated in it. So that is a significant step towards becoming a regional and a global leader when it comes to carbon markets. And considering many of the things, whether in the fintech sector, outside the fintech sector, are happening in the region, this is also another important step that the region has taken when it comes to dominance globally, when it comes to carbon markets and climate finance as well. So these are some of the areas that I would say that I would basically tie down to UAE and to to Saudi Arabia. I'm sure, I mean, if you have any other points that you want me to address, we'll certainly address them.
I think these are the main ones. We can come back to digital asset a little while later as a thematic, maybe for the region versus individually. Do you want to touch upon some other economies or countries with some of the key initiatives or developments over the last year?
Sure. Ronit, would you like to take this one?
All yours.
Nice.
You can edit this out later on.
Yeah, I know, of course. So I think on the economic side, there has been great, I mean, without naming it, without pointing out any numbers, on the economic side, I think the region has been largely focusing on the non-oil trade, which has been the focus for the longest time. And if you can see what has been happening when it comes to trade, the corridors being established. And I think if you look at the economy in general, if you pick up UAE, I mean, let's just pick up the one important sector, which is non-fintech, but real estate. That's a very strong indicator that it's not slowing down in any way. So the capital injection has been consistent into the region, and we don't see a slowdown when it comes to capital injection. And then, of course, at the same time, previously it was UAE, the flag bearer. Now you have Saudi as another flag bearer of the region. Two of them leading the race, not just in the region, but outside the region globally as well. So I would say economically, you know, and the region is also outperforming in another very important sector, which is wealth management. I'll actually pull out the numbers for you, but if you compare the Middle East versus the European markets and the Far East market, the Middle Eastern market has been outperforming even North America as well when it comes to wealth. The sector is growing significantly. That says two things: capital injection in the region, and number two, of course, more wealth creation as well.
Fair comment. And maybe now we can move to the other countries. You want to start with maybe Qatar or Oman, Bahrain?
I'll pick up with and I'll leave it to Ronit to you know, further take a deep dive on this. But for example, I want to highlight what has happened recently in Morocco. So in Morocco, very recently, they are basically going to be legalizing crypto assets. So that is a 6 to 7 years ban that is being lifted. So that's another good progress from a very important market in the region. So for me, that is a very good indicator and a very good sign for digital assets. That's what I see. I just wanted to highlight this piece because, yeah, Ronit, what do you have to say on this?
I think it's part of a broader trend that we're going to see in many countries, particularly in the context of the change in U.S. administration coming up that we're in the middle of. We're seeing a slow transition from, like a lot of new technologies, illicit actors tend to be more dominant or predominant in the early stages of any new technology, and crypto has been no different. And what you're seeing is a increasing mainstreaming, and hopefully you're going to see more of that, and specifically starting with the UAE, where Namir, you and I are based. You obviously have a lot of very institutional focused players in Abu Dhabi, and you've got some pretty major participants in the space, both in Dubai and Abu Dhabi now. But equally, you've had, and obviously the regulators, Musheer's old ex-colleagues at VARA, others in different parts of the regulatory system are all over this. But you've had a lot of kind of less than desirable players in the ecosystem. Let's just leave it like that. And hopefully you're going to see more of a maturing of that in 2025, like we've been seeing in 2024. I mean, Namir, we recently held one of our monthly meetups, right, in Dubai. And one of the things you called out to us was just how many institutional digital asset players signed up to join that event, without giving a shout out to the monthly event that Namir hosts in Dubai and other places around the Middle East. And that was quite notable, right? Namir, do you remember the numbers? How many institutional digital asset players signed up for that event? It was quite a high percentage.
Almost like 60 to 65% were all, you know, institutions. It was significant. Even I was surprised to see this number, and I was telling Ronit and everyone in the back, like, what's happening?
Yeah, this is the monthly MFTA after hours meetup in Dubai. And when Namir said that there was a lot of digital asset players, I did ask him if they was you know, halal or not, and apparently they are.
Quite halal. Quite halal. We make it a point to filter.
Yeah, no, that was it's a very high number, and there's increasing institutionalization happening. I'm not saying that's just necessarily a good thing, but you're seeing a more compliance and regulation friendly industry emerging. Early stages still, but it's emerging.
Sorry, I was going to say,
I saw that I saw one of these numbers. It was, I think, around $3 billion in terms of the transactions that have happened when it comes to crypto market in the MENA region itself. And it was also, by the way, primarily led, what I remember, by institutional players.
Yeah, and both UAE and Turkey, as an example, in the region, are leaders when it comes to, from various surveys, adoption, users, base in crypto, right? But as just adding to the points, maybe I think a couple of things that struck me about crypto in UAE. Of course, you now have a lot more licensed players over 2024 than you had previously, which probably there were only a handful out of VARA, but now you have 22 licensed players out of VARA plus ADGM and DIFC. And then you also have newer regulations to add to the standard regulations, in particular stablecoins being a major focus for both onshore as well as offshore regulators, right? With
Absolutely.
ADGM, VARA talking about it, and CBUA. The key element going forward is going to be the harmonization, which and coordination between the regulators. And you saw one of the main, from a crypto perspective, I think the announcement around from the ESCA about passporting, if I can use that term very crudely, of VARA licensees to other Emirates, right? With just with notifying ESCA is a big step forward, because you don't then have to go through a licensing regime in each of the Emirates, the states equivalent of UAE, right? I think those are going to be good stories, and as you rightly said, lot of people have moved their funds. You're seeing a lot of VC investment as well. Coming to investments, anything you guys going to add? I remember looking at numbers being very positive for the Middle East in fintech, less so crypto, but we can switch back to fintech for now.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think what you've seen, I mean, maybe there's two things to call out here. One is about fintech, but then you could maybe zoom out to emerging tech in general, Musheer. The VC numbers, the VC fintech investing numbers for Saudi and UAE are more resilient than the rest of the world, partly because of a difference in cycle, in terms of timing, as in India, China, obviously the US. But if you look in outside the non-US markets, India and China had their waves earlier in fintech. And what you're seeing now is, in the last couple of years, attention shift to the Middle East, basically the UAE and Saudi in particular, from international funds. And that's happened in the last few years. But you've got to zoom out more broadly and look at fintech, I think, in a broader lens, which is the interest that the governing or ruling elite and the policymakers in many of these jurisdictions in the GCC, not just in Saudi and the UAE, but in the region, their interest in emerging tech. And this is most notable in the huge amount of, and we haven't touched upon AI, and it's what, 20 minutes into our conversation, 25 minutes into our conversation since we put on our meta glasses. And the whole interest in AI in particular in the region, with Abu Dhabi doing a lot, but also Saudi, Dubai, that's going to be a big trend in 2025. Because you're not just, this is not just kind of, this is real investments being made by international players, but also local investors who are investing internationally and locally. This is, and there's a kind of difference here, which is if you went back maybe to a decade ago, a lot of the trends would have been capital flowing out of the region, out of KSA, UAE, Qatar, towards investments in the US or Europe or China. Now you're seeing that still happen, combined with investments being made in the region in emerging tech. And that's been a big change. And you're seeing those investments being made in the region being paralleled with flows coming in from global players like the Microsofts of the world into the region. And that's a big trend, which is going to be a multi-year trend, because obviously AI shapes everything in 2025.
And I think if you, I would just like to add, like, thanks, Ronit, for bringing the AI piece. So if you recall, there was $100 billion fund launched by Abu Dhabi, MGX, I believe. And this was like launched early this year. And then I think right after that, or before that, we also had the PIF from Saudi Arabia also launching their $100 billion initiative. So I think there are two things. One is the investment coming into the region, and of course the sovereign wealth funds of the region further investing into it as well. So yeah, very interesting space. We have both areas being covered. Investments from the region and investments coming from outside the region as well.
Totally.
Switching gears, Naveed, do you want to touch upon some of the updates from, say, Qatar or Bahrain and Oman?
So I think, Musheer, in terms of AI, what has happened recently is, again, they've also launched, Qatar has if I talk about what has happened in the space of AI, continuing to what we were discussing before, around $2.4 billion were invested to basically enhance their AI capabilities to attract global technology experts and leading players into the country as well. So I think this is an important play that we have seen what has happened in Qatar. When it comes to Qatar, we have seen Qatar, while the region has in general moved upwards, we have also seen Qatar also taking some steady steps when it comes to being a lot more open to fintechs. In fact, the MENA Fintech Association has been hosting regularly roundtables and what we call our boardroom meetings with some of the leading players in the market. And we have seen interest in terms of the Qatari banks now engaging with non-Qatari fintechs as well, which means they're open to the wider region, which is an important play. Second, Qatar is also focusing significantly towards digital assets, which is another area that they have been looking on to. From my conversation with many of the players when it comes to wealth, again, Qatar is an important region to look out for. Of course, with the high GDP of the country as well, this is a great area of interest. And I believe when it comes to other markets such as Bahrain, so Bahrain was one of the first players, one of the first countries to launch their digital assets framework, and they have been successful in attracting some of the leading players. However, fast forward today, again, they had the right platform. Now, when there is increased interest into the region, you're also seeing many players setting up their headquarters in Bahrain too. So that has been some of the trends that I would see. Because you see, if you look at Bahrain, Bahrain had launched their open finance and digital assets frameworks way before. And now, as the region is growing, you would see them growing as well.
Perfect. I think even just adding a couple of things on Qatar from a regulatory perspective, because QDB there's been a lot of action. They've reissued, not reissued, but came up with frameworks earlier this year on largely dealing with open banking. Then, as you mentioned, digital assets, and then last week coming up with the digital banking framework, right? As in terms of heading into 2025. So I'm just touching on that. Anything else in Middle East, North Africa that you want to cover before we close? In terms of this
I think
very,
if you
very
look at the
informative
wider
update.
region, if you look at the wider region, Musheer, right, from Morocco to Saudi Arabia, Egypt's digital banking licenses, also Egypt opening doors for non-banking fintechs, that are going to be now regulated by the FRA in Egypt. If you look at what has been happening in Oman launched their national payment systems for secure digital payments. That was another key, I would say, initiative that they had launched. You are looking at their sandbox, I would say, testing solutions as well. Again, this is quite critical because now I think the approach towards sandbox is a lot more mature in the region. So if you look at the overall, UAE, Morocco, Saudi, Egypt, Oman, Bahrain, Qatar, all of the markets have progressed significantly. And some of the standouts would be, of course, the UAE's stablecoin, dirham-backed stablecoin framework. That was one of the important ones. Morocco, lifting the 2017 ban on crypto and digital assets. That was another significant play. Qatar launching their digital assets framework, again, a critical play. So if you look at it, the region is moving forward and the region is also attracting capital at the same time. So when I say attracting capital, not just in the fintech sector, but you're looking at capital being attracted into other industries and sectors as well. The region is also investing heavily into climate finance. Of course, they are future-proofing and investing into the future, which is very critical. And the region, if you look at it, UAE was one of the first countries to launch the carbon markets framework as well, because we had the first regulated exchange set up in UAE. You have a very robust licensing framework out of Abu Dhabi Global Markets for carbon markets, which is critical to have as well. And then at the same time, if you look at it, some of the, Virtual Asset Regulatory Authority, VARA, had also basically taken a step when it comes to encouraging companies to voluntarily start disclosing their emissions, right? To start reporting their sustainability as well, sustainability reports. So basically, if you look at it, these are all indicators where the market is heading towards. Today is voluntary, tomorrow it might be compulsory, but that's another opportunity, right? So all in all, the region is going through, I always say the region is a gold mine. Some of the important elements that I would say to look at for the next year is going to be digital assets, 110%, because already, in 2024, if I'm not wrong, around $30 billion were attracted UAE attracted around $30 billion just in digital assets last year, which was another good number to see as well. Simultaneously, if you look at it, as I mentioned earlier on, the market for digital assets has reached around $338 to $340 billion, which is another good number. You're looking at sustainable finance. I mentioned a couple of things over here. The trillion dirham commitment from the banks when it comes to climate finance. Altera, the fund based out of Abu Dhabi, $30 billion fund, which was also announced in COP28. And then if you look at wealth management, the digital asset management market within the region is going to be around the $6.9 billion by 2025. That's another key area to look at. The wealth sector, I see some of the larger institutions looking at the wealth sector very, very closely. You already have some of the fintechs operating in this space, like Sarva and UAE. You have Thunder, you have Capital.com, and a few others who are operating in this space. But I think, and I am very positive, in 2025, this sector is going to grow significantly because you have some of the really large players looking at it very, very closely as well. And of course, sustainable finance that I mentioned before as well, not because I'm just closely involved in it, but because there's no industry or no sector that is going to be away from it.
Perfect. Nameer, thank you so much, and Ronit as well, for this is very, very insightful. We've gone into a lot of depth into it, so it'll be very beneficial for our users. Wishing you a good end of the year and a great AD Abu Dhabi Finance Week ahead, and look forward to seeing you in the new year. Take care again. Thank you both.
Absolutely. Look forward to seeing you, Musheer. Thank you.